This past December, I took a trip to Paris. I talked to a Parisian about Parisian culture. Then he mentioned in one of his things that Americans don't have culture, but we do, from small things like cheeseburgers to big things like movies. Also, somewhere in between, skateboarding. It's a large part of our culture. It started in the 1950s with California surfers who just wanted to mimic things in the water on land. It was pretty dangerous at the time because they had clay wheels that were really susceptible to rocks and cracks. Also, another dangerous thing were planks of wood. The wood would break really easily, but they finally fixed that when they compressed layers of wood together to make one sturdy piece of wood. Then, at its peak of its popularity in 1963, they started having competitions. Big companies, skateboarding companies like Jackson Makaha, started having competitions where they'd have downhill and freestyle. Downhill was just pretty much a 300-foot hill with cones where skateboarders would weave in and out of the cones to see who had the fastest time. Then the freestyle skateboarders were on the skateboards. They would do handstands and also do other things, but they usually wouldn't leave the ground. It's more of a ballet type of skateboarding. Then in 1965, skateboarding crashed. It was considered a fad, and it was also considered the hula hoop of its time. Skaters had to find new ways to skateboard, or they had to find new ways to make their skateboards. They would make them out of dresser drawers, or just go into hardware stores and just steal 2x4s. Then in 1970, a new generation of Z-Boys, this was still at the time when skateboarding crashed, but they still wanted to mimic surfers, and they were true surfers of their time. They would mimic the stuff on water, which was about being low and feeling the concrete just like surfers when they feel the concrete. And they also had a new shape. The skateboard wasn't as long, it was a little shorter, and it was shaped more like a surfboard. That way they could carve when they turned. Also, in 1972 was the invention of the urethane wheel. The wheel was made of oil, and it also gripped better. It was it was invented by Frank Nasworthy, who was the maker of Cadillac wheels, which was the Cadillac wheel for skateboarding. And also, they rode pools, which was help them carve better with a new urethane wheel, and it also mimicked the waves better. Also, in 1975, the Zephyr team decided they want to enter a competition to show the world their new style of skateboarding, which they showed which was style. It was all about looking good on the skateboard. It wasn't about doing handstands and looking funny. It was all about looking good, because that's what surfing was about at the time. It's all about making yourself look nice. Also, it was still about the low and smooth style. But this style, it made them really popular and led to the first skateboarding superstars like Tony Alva, Jay Adams, and Stacy Peralta. And also in 1978, another superstar came out, Alan Gaffon, also named Ollie, invented the trick called the Ollie, which was where the skateboarders would hit the tail and raise up in the air and be in the midair for about half a second. Then in the late 1970s, skateboarding had a second crash. Parks were being built, but insurance for the parks were really expensive since skateboarding was so dangerous, so less skaters could skate at the parks. Then in the early 80s, skateboarding was considered underground. They had ramps, they just mimicked the pools. The ramps were really high, so skateboarders could go up in the air. They had about 4 feet of vertical ramp. And they also had new boards. The boards were a little longer. The tail was raised up so that when they got to the peak of the ramp, they could go out a little bit. And also new wheels. The wheels were bigger for faster speeds. Then in 1984, they started making skateboarding teams. The first team, the Bones Brigade. Stacy Peralta from the Z-Boys and George Peralta, a new skater. They started the team with famous skateboarders like Tony Hawk to smaller time skateboarders like Rodney Mullen and Steve Caballero. Then the invention of the VCR, it really progressed skateboarding because it caused skateboarders to have it in their home. They could watch documentaries of skateboarding. They could watch new things where they could have it in their home and watch professional skateboarders on their actual TV. Then in the late 80s, skateboarding had its third crash. Vert died completely. No one really wanted to go up in the air. It was so much cheaper and easier just to ride on the road. Skateboarders like Mike Vallely invented tricks like grinding and also tricks where they flipped the skateboard. Then in the early 90s, skateboarding began to grow a little bit more, and a new skateboard was invented. It was the double-sided skateboard, which has a tall nose and a tall tail. This helped flip the skateboard so the skateboarders could do flip tricks, and also the wheels got smaller so that when they did flip tricks, it would flip a little faster. And skateboarding, since it wasn't as big still, they had a new attitude. They were real dangerous, edgy, and raw. And usually it was the poor kids, and everyone everyone kind of wanted to be the poor outcast kid because it drew attention to him. So it fueled its popularity. Then in 1995, ESPN decided to have their own new skateboard competition called the X Games. This made skateboarding even more mainstream, and it became closer to being accepted by the population. And vert also became popular again. Professional skateboarders like Tony Hawk started becoming millionaires. You started having some of the really rich people in Hollywood being actually skateboarders. Then since 2000, they've had media products, video games, and children's skateboards, and it's more commercialized. It's about being a skateboarder, and it's now accepted by the mainstream. So in conclusion, skateboarding, it's all about living life, and it's also considered a professional sport, and that is our culture. It's about sports, burgers, and movies, and skateboarding is part of our culture.